I'm Ruth Ezel outside the Missouri History Museum. In April of 2017, a year-long exhibit opened that focused on the history of civil rights in St. Louis. One of the figures in the exhibit was a man remembered as a judge and newspaper publisher. Turns out that was just for starters. The multimedia exhibit, number 1 in civil rights, the African American freedom struggle in St. Louis, details the watershed moments of the movement locally. And few studied and analyzed it more thoroughly than the Honorable Nathan B. Young, co-founder of the St. Louis American newspaper. Judge Young once wrote, "I think the complete civil rights background and history could be taken and understood better by the history of St. Louis, Missouri, completely."
He was my inspiration for actually doing this exhibit.
Curator Gwendolyn Moore.
Not only was he one of the founders of the St. Louis American, of course he was the editorial writer for the next 42, 43 years. And like I said, a lot of his editorials were like little mini history lessons. He was really deeply interested in local African American history and did a lot of research on local African American history and was basically an expert.
Even the exhibit's title, number 1 in civil rights, was taken from Judge Young's writings.
He based it primarily on the fact that we had more civil rights cases go to the Supreme Court than any other city in the nation. And he did his research and he talked about the other civil rights cases in other cities. And he said very few cities could even boast one such case. And at the time, when he first wrote that article in 1964, it was 3. Then in 1968, we had 4. And then by the time he did one of his final interviews, it was 6. So he was right on target.
Nathan Benjamin Young was born in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1894. His education included a bachelor's degree from Florida A&M and a law degree from Yale.
Granddaddy graduated in 1918 from Yale Law School, magna cum laude.
Young's grandson, Victor Thompson.
His constitutional law teacher was William Taft, who was one of the presidents. His schoolmate was Carl Llewellyn. He is the preeminent author on the UCC, United Uniform Commercial Code.
Nathan B. Young's academic achievements come as no surprise when you consider his father's distinguished career. The elder Nathan B. Young was a graduate of Oberlin College in Ohio. In the late 19th century, he received bachelor and master's degrees in Latin and Greek, respectively. By the time his namesake was born, Young was head of the English department at Tuskegee Institute and the protege and next-door neighbor of Tuskegee founder Booker T. Washington. Young Sr. eventually became president of Florida A&M and later Lincoln University in Jefferson City. Father persuaded son to move to Missouri for, among other reasons, his own safety.
When he graduated from Yale Law School, and I think he was up in New Haven for a couple of years doing the writing thing, and then ended up down in Alabama. And that's where he met his dear wife, and he was the attorney for the NAACP down there. Practiced law, but ended up as that. And then some people with some white sheets showed up, and it was time for him to exit. And since his father was at Lincoln University at the time, his dad said, "Come to St. Louis," and he came to St. Louis.
Once here, Young quickly established himself. He was a member of the St. Louis Negro Bar Association, founded in 1922 because black attorneys at the time were denied admission to the St. Louis Bar Association. Several years later, Young and a group of African American businessmen founded the St. Louis American newspaper.
That was the birth of the black press. And so we had the Chicagos, the New Yorks. A lot of African American print news was developed back in those eras because there was no communication in the community, and the news was important for people to know.
In the mid-1960s, Young broke the color barrier in the local courts when Mayor Alfonso Cervantes appointed him a municipal judge.
At that time, the city was divided. They had 2 city courts. City Court number 1 was George Cady, that handled all of the South Side. And at that time, the South Side was white. City Court number 2 was Judge Young, which was the north side, which was predominantly black. So it was Judge Cady and Judge Young, and he was the first one. He got elevated out of the city council's office.
What qualities do you think Judge Young embodied?
The first is integrity. One of the great things about him was that as he retired at age 75 from the bench, he taught himself how to paint. And he created over 400 original oil paintings, and behind every one of the paintings is a manuscript. And he worked diligently, sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 hours a day in the basement with his little traditional green lampshade like the old accountants used to do. And all of those are now in the repository in the archives of St. Louis University.
In this case, I'm going to use a reproduction of this that we made.
John Wade of St. Louis University's Pius Library knows the Young collection well. Here he shows the artist's interpretation of the classic painting American Gothic.
American Gaucherie. And the thing which, like you were talking about, the social commentary, you know, I mean, this is one where he really jabs you, because he has, you know, Shirley Chisholm, the black congresswoman, and George Wallace, who was not a very kind person towards African Americans, former governor of Alabama.
Judge Young reinterpreted Thomas Gainsborough's The Blue Boy. Current events were favorite themes, though Young often painted sports figures. The university staged an exhibit of the judge's work and has archived not just his paintings, but also his voluminous writings.
He always liked to write. He was one of the contributors to the Harlem Renaissance. He had a pen named Pablo. He'll remember it in a second.
I have never seen this name before. When I went to the exhibit at the History Museum, it was Pablo Chavez.
Something else the men may not have expected at the exhibit was hearing the judge's own voice discussing the Missouri Compromise.
And for 2 years in Congress, there was a clamor over this Missouri's coming to the Union. But the school books don't tell you the truth about the Missouri Compromise.
Nathan B. Young died in 1993 at the age of 98, but he left a lasting legacy.
Well, I'm very impressed with Judge Young anyway, as you can probably tell. But he's an impressive man, and he deserves all the accolades that we can give him.